Welcome to FOB TV, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict. I'm a futurist and lecturer at TCS, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Now, today in particular, this is part 2 of our series on the future of happiness. And in these times of crazy anxiety and worry globally, a lot of it caused by us, I want to just say that's why we're focusing on the future of happiness today. So our guest, I'm so excited to introduce him, is Dr. Juha Mattsson. Juha, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here. Great meeting you.
So Juha's the CEO of Futures Platform. At least he was the CEO of Futures Platform until maybe today or a couple days ago. So now he has a new role, I think, because you just experienced a merger. Tell us about that, Juha.
Yeah. So as some of the listeners probably know, we've been out there for a while, almost 10 years now. We have our own Futurist team producing foresight analysis. We also have the software tool, an end-to-end tool or solution as we think about it for foresight teams to start from horizon scanning through visualization to analysis to scenario analysis, contesting your strategy, everything. We've been even, developing our own scenario methods, the PCA method. Then we do a little bit, let's say, consulting for our clients. We try to be a software company though. And we just launched today, coincidentally, it didn't have anything to do with you inviting me here, but we launched, it's now public. We are merging with a little bit smaller company called Statson. And basically they are pulling stats from Stetson. No, they actually are more like, they actually have a pretty interesting business model. They integrate, it's almost like Spotify of market research and statistics forecasts. And they integrate, they have a lot of market research partners. They partner up, gather subscriptions from clients. And when you subscribe, you can basically access like 1 million different, data charts or forecasts. And also, I think there's close to 100,000 market research reports. And why we are joining this company, it's because we work with foresight teams, with foresight analysis, as you know, which is very qualitative. And there's always the question that, hey, your content, your analysis is great, but can you dig deeper? Can I dig deeper? Like what this means to our industry, our country, our region, our city, our company, me, my children, and so on. And obviously our futurist can't cover everything of that. But we can get closer by 2 means, by integrating this kind of a concrete market data. And secondly, fusing everything together with the help of generative AI. So making sure the sources are valid, reliable, and then having AI work in a kind of restricted environment with that data to provide their analysis and synthesis of multiple data points. And we think that's really powerful.
Congratulations on that. So what role are you going to have in the new organization?
I'm going to still be the CEO.
All right.
So,
that's awesome.
It'll be a great team. There's a lot of complementarity also with those guys. So they will be just in the right places, patching some of our existing teams.
Now, where are they headquartered out of?
They are also a Helsinki-based, Finland-based.
All right. For our followers, you might know I was just in Helsinki, and boy, I was fascinated, loved it. And I'll be honest, the reason my wife and I went is we really did want to explore what the world global ranking says is the #1 happiest place in the world.
Yeah.
And in my anxiety, I want to just what is so happy about Finland? So we went there and we learned a lot, but I'm going to ask you about that here in just a minute. But tell us, how did you end up as a futurist? What was your journey like?
Well, actually, to be told, I'm not a futurist by training. So I did my PhD in organization science. I was studying organizational ecology, which is a kind of sociological stream in understanding populations and evolution of populations of organizations, like organizational forms. That was very interesting in understanding what happens in the macro level. What are the sociological mechanisms impacting, let's say, a new industry emerging or some other industry declining and something like this. So that's where I come from. Then I stepped to the other side, so started managing companies. We first established a consulting company. I was the managing partner of that. Was something like for 5 years, and then I guess I got a little bit bored about consulting. So then I wanted to really put hands in the mud and start myself, managing companies. And then I think this is my third or fourth like growth company I'm in with the CEO type of position.
Wow.
And it's been really, really fun and great journey. And I've been at Futurist platform now for 4 years. So I'm not a founder, but in those 4 years, I surely know what the Futurists do and what's at the essence of strategic foresight and all that. So maybe by that, I could consider myself at least.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Now, what's the weather like in Helsinki today?
It's sunny and almost 10 degrees more warm than it normally should be at this stage. In March, and even in Helsinki, very often you would have still snow, and it would be like between -2 to +3 or something, and the snow may be starting to melt. But now it's completely dry. All snow is gone. It's every now and then you have these winters which are very low snow, and this happened to be one.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate for those that like to ski and do all the fun stuff out there, ice fishing, all that kind of fun stuff.
Then you go to the north, so it's not a problem.
You just keep going north. That's right. So, as we mentioned earlier, Finland for 8 straight years in the global ranking is the happiest country in the world. Now there has to be so much to learn from that. But before I get that, I'm going to ask you, what do you think that happiness means? That word happiness means to a Finn? Because whenever I talk to a Finn about this, they're like, why? I don't know how we could be ranked the happiest place.
Yeah. So, of course, my first answer to the question of 8 years in a row with that is that, of course, Futurist platform was founded 8 years ago. That was a joke. But anyway, we have to remember that when you dig into the particular study, the actual thing that they are measuring is not what we commonly think as happiness, but they are actually, I think, measuring something which is more like satisfaction or content, I think is the right word in English. So generally they ask things like, how, on a scale from 0 to 10, what do you think about like your life? Is your life complete misery, which is the kind of 0, and
yes,
or perfect life? And then somehow on that scale, we end up being ranked top. And I do also have an explanation for that. And I guess the biggest reason is that Finns are a people satisfied of little. So in a way, and that actually has historical roots as well as other more society related and government related things. But I think the historical roots are in the fact that we've been multiple times, I don't know if colonized is the right word, but we've been part of the Swedish Empire back in the day. Then we've been part of the Russian Empire. And we've been independent only, but that's actually quite a long time, only 100 years plus. And I think, and even with that time, with the Cold War and everything, and Russia or the Soviet Union trying to, invade Finland during the Second World War in a very similar way, what's happening in Ukraine right now, we've had to be like quite wary about these kinds of things, almost like being the neutral Switzerland of not saying anything politically incorrect to any direction. And I think that must have a role in the cultural, way we are as people, really flexible, content of little, and just focusing on building a functional society. I think that's perhaps my core response. Of course, then there are probably other things like how the social welfare is organized and these kinds of things.
That is fascinating. I think there's so much to learn. A few years ago, there was a book that was a bestseller. It was like The Minimalist, I think was the name of it. It's like, how do you be happy and content with minimal possessions? And, that's an art. That certainly is. That's an art. And for those that can be content and happy in the place they're at, there's a lot to learn there. But I'm going to ask you here, I added this question after I talked to you about some of the questions here. What role does saunas play in Finn happiness. I understand there's 5.6 million Finns and there's 3 million saunas in the country. Wow.
I think it really does have an impact. So we have this tradition of, or it's not even a saying, it's just everybody knows it really, basically, that sauna is the place. And we have a lot, if you look at Finnish local music, you would find several songs about telling about this, the sauna and how it's a place where you forget all the stress and you just sit. If you have any twists with your buddies or family, any that kind of a arguing, all that melts down in the sauna. So that's a very common folklore even in Finland. And that holds a lot of truth. So people do go to sauna, and it's a place for relaxation, and it's really you kind of take the hot steam. There are different types of saunas, but we usually warm it pretty high, like 80 degrees Celsius, even 100, and then throw water on the hot stove, which creates even more heat. And it's almost like somebody tried to really beat the anger out of you, if you would say so. I think that has a role, but that has another connotation, which I think it relates to the kind of minimalism you were speaking about, the kind of poorness versus richness. We have a lot of the population compared to the land area is very small. So the population density is very low in Finland. We have thousands of lakes. If you go to the southwest part of the Finland, there's a very large archipelago of singular small islands and these things. So we have a lot of area for being in the nature. And I think that also plays, and a lot of the saunas are actually located in distant places. People have their summer places. Usually you want to have it in a place where there's nobody else, like,
yes,
get off. I just want to be myself. We're introverts, I guess, in that sense. And and then you have the saunas there, and then you just spend time with your dear people and families and go to the sauna and just relax.
Wow. So when I was preparing for this, I read that there was 180,000 like named lakes in Finland, 180,000, and there's something like 50,000 islands. So there's a lot of places to get away and have a cabin and a sauna in the forest.
Yeah, that is very true. So I think that must have some kind of, I can't prove it scientifically, or I don't know if there's studies about it. Probably there might be, but I as a just a common sense says that must have an impact on it.
Wow. So let's go back, let's say 50 years, because this happiness, this contentment, this ability to be completely satisfied in your present position, that doesn't happen by itself. You guys had to actually develop a society that works in that environment. Can you tell us a little bit about what Finland has done over the last 50 years that got it to this 8 straight years of top of the happiness ranking?
Yeah, that's a cunning question. It's like, I think it's probably a multitude of factors. It relates to the political being very at the center and not leaning too much in any direction, and just focusing on keeping peace there and not getting anybody angry and just building up things. We have to remember that because officially Finland was deemed to lose in the Second World War, part of that then that agreement was that we had to provide, I don't know what that's in English, but give things to produce things for Soviet Union. And even though it seems like why we had to do as a small country for that, but it actually boosted our economic development because we had to produce build houses there. We needed to provide train cars and all kinds of these kind of basic technological products, and ship them to Soviet Union as some kind of a remuneration.
I think the word in the U.S. is reparations.
Yeah, might be. Yeah, that sounds like right. Yeah. Anyway, but I think that has had, despite all, gave this nice kind of boost in the economy. And then there's been this history of building a welfare state, which means that the taxes have been always very high in Finland, which everybody always complains about. And it's funny, like it's been always in Finland that people are content. When you ask from Finns, we are super happy and no biggies. But then we have this tendency of always complaining about nitty-gritty things like, the taxes are too much and all that. But of course, as you know, the flip side of the high taxation is then quite big government spending. And of course, that's in social welfare, education, building infrastructure. these kinds of things. So I think that has also paved the way in people's content or satisfaction that the basic things are running. And the very low corruption throughout the years, I think we've ranked quite high on those rankings as well.
So Juha, let me jump in here real quick and just ask you, what are some of the main things covered in that welfare state? Because in the US, the idea of welfare state, that's a problem. We see that as a problem. But you guys have built it to be a powerful driver of happiness. So tell us what's included in that when you say welfare state.
Well, I think it's all the basic services First of all, like I mentioned, the infrastructure, education, healthcare. There's just like a huge amount of that, and of course that consumes and expands the government budget at least the 50 years or even more. The unions have been really strong, and they've done a lot of work. Finland's been a very safe place to work because you've had like a lot of security, put more flexibility lately there. But there was a point where it was literally impossible to fire anybody from a company. If you had a job, you had a job forever, unless you really did something or the company had to like dismantle and so on. But there's a little bit more flexibility because it's starting to be too rigid. But I think it's, again, this flip side of the coins that when you have that, then you have a lot of security. People feel secure in their lives. That even if you might get unemployed, you have a very, very strong unemployment benefits. That's, by the way, also a matter of debate in Finland all the time. Like, is it too much? Is it too little?
Yes.
Are people free riding and blah, blah, blah. So, but that's been like that as long as I remember.
What about elder care? What services are included in that for the elderly?
Yeah. Well, of course, there's this public pension. So that's also a very different system, which is now facing a little bit problem, though, because of the demographic development, which probably all know. So, but basically, the public system goes in such a way that you are entitled to specific pension after a specific year of age, and that pension is basically paid by all others who are still working.
Right.
And that's all fine when there's balance. But when there's imbalance, like it starts now to be that there's a lot of more, the number of people being on pension are growing, but then the number of people actually working is getting lower. So that's a kind of problem. And then they had to push up the threshold age and all that stuff. So, but all in all, I think that's been one of the things that it's, you don't have to do this. There's a lot of these kinds of government provided elements of security, like the pension insurance. Then there's also something called, the unemployment insurance in a way,
yes.
and some similar stuff that's kind of guaranteed and provided by law in Finland. And yeah, I think that's part of it. And then one more thing, I think there's been a lot of, this relates to the kind of plan, even city planning and regional planning of very rarely letting cities or any urban areas to grow in such a way that you would have this kind of very rich areas and these very poor areas. They've deliberately mixed things, even though it again causes this little bit of complaints that why I have to have these guys in the neighbors. But all in all, when you look at the society levels, it kind of balances things out. That's the same for schools as well. So you don't, generally in Finland, every school is considered the same. It's not entirely that, but generally, roughly it is.
That's fascinating, because in places that don't have the security of those systems in place through government programs, those are high anxiety and high worry areas. So I could see how many people, 50% of our bankruptcies in the US are caused because of healthcare costs. Somebody had to go to the hospital. There's a $50,000 US dollar bill, and that puts somebody into bankruptcy. So those high anxiety environments just don't exist in there. So that's fascinating there. But the argument, if we were to introduce that kind of notion in the US, the argument on one side would be, the high taxes, which everybody will always complain about no matter where. But they'll say that reduces people's desire to be competitive, to work hard. But let me just go through some statistics. In 2024, Finland was ranked 15th out of 67 countries in the IMD World Competitiveness ranking. So that tells us right there, you guys are in the top quadrant of competitiveness, even though you have this infrastructure. In the 2017 World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, Finland was ranked 10th globally. Again, you guys have found the way to have both things. You have the security and the lack of life anxiety around those things, but at the same time, you're ranked in the top quadrant competitively. And that comes with digital competitiveness globally. You guys are ranked super high, as well as, I mean, just so much there. How do you do it? How do you be both globally business competitive while you have this very relaxed and secure life environment? Talk to us about that.
Well, first of all, you would probably need to go also back again to the kind of questions and statistics that they are putting together in those comparisons, what the competitiveness really means. Because if you look at, for example, the amount of like very large global companies coming over from Finland versus even to Sweden, it's very different. So the Swedes are much better in both producing music, obviously, but then producing, global companies like IKEA, H&M. It's just so many, and we had Nokia and a few others in the gaming side and so on. So it's like a little bit debatable, like what does that competitiveness mean? But in terms of, they always say that the Finns are great in innovation and producing, and in technology and producing these product ideas and solving things. But we're really poor in commercializing and getting the money out of it things. So it's usually always scaled up with somebody else. Part of that is actually, and that's interesting comparing to Sweden, because what's a big difference is that, well, Sweden obviously has a different history if we go like 200 years back, and it's already from there, it's been much richer nation, like when we talk about ownership and welfare that people own and the state owns. But it has continued, and Sweden has continuously done political and other choices in their society to also keep and boost individuals' owner amount of welfare they own, and that there's a striking difference between Finland and Sweden about that. We Finns are in that comparison much poorer in the sense. I mean, we're not poor in the meaning of poor, but in comparison to Swedes. So there's a lot of these families who own a lot, and they have a lot of money, and they reinvest it back to the business, and that kind of creates this virtuous cycle compared to Finland. But yeah, coming back to the question, so I guess they would compare also like the level of education, the average salaries, these kinds of things, and then use that as the comparison of competitiveness. And yes, there probably we kind of fit in quite nicely.
Got it. So talk to us about the work-life balance. We haven't got there yet. So Finland, you guys are hardworking. You solve lots of problems. You guys, a lot of natural resources. There's a lot of business going on, a growing economy. How is the work-life balance? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think it's generally really good. And all of these things, as it turns out, they are related. So I think it's very nicely, all people I basically know, they have things pretty much in shape. So they have enough time for family, if you get children or need to go, I mean, for example, the parental leaves. So the maternity leave the standard is 9 months. I understand that in the US it's much less if you are a woman and
much less.
Child. Yeah. So it's like minimum 9. But then there's and I think for the male it's paternity is like, is it 4 weeks? There's a little bit of time for that from that, but something like that. But then there's this quota which you can share with your wife, and you can decide like who takes the extra. The mother can extend her maternity leave, or if you're the kind of father who wants to stay at home, you can take it also. And it's guaranteed by law. And there's a social security system that guarantees you're paid according to your salary, and the company doesn't have to pay it for you, but you don't get fully that amount, but it's like maybe it's 70% of of your typical salary you had. So
you how much vacation? So maternity 9 months. That does the rest of the world hear that? 9 months for a mother, and they can share that and split it between father and mother. That's amazing. Talk to me about your holiday time. What's the average amount of holiday time in?
Yeah, the annual leave time is like 4 weeks or 5, depending a little bit on where you're working. But roughly that's the case. Obviously, since the summer is so short in Finland, everybody wants to have them in July. So don't do business in Finland in July. Nothing's happening.
So we talked about the trust in institutions and in the government, and how in a lot of places, including the U.S., that's at like an all-time low, the trust in government organizations. Yeah. What's the secret in Finland? How come Finns trust their government to take care of them and to support them in the way they should?
I guess the government has been just on average doing a good. I mean, we have this saying of choosing the golden middle. I don't know if you have a similar in English, but you might actually. But anyway, I think they've succeeded in doing it in the past years. Though I have to say that the past, like everywhere else in the world, the past maybe 10 years or so, also the kind of polarization is building up in Finland, and the reasons are known. It's partially external. There's partially probably some kind of external influence on it. It's partially about the expansion of social media and everything being global. And then we also, as futurists, we know that there are these macro cycles of these things, that these just tend to be cycling over and over again over hundreds and tens of years. Yeah. So it just happens to be this kind of a time. But I have to say that there is a growing polarization in Finland as well. And there's a lot of very direct political debate out there, people shouting to them in kind of television interviews. And, it's like, it didn't used to be like that.
Yeah, that's the key phrase. It didn't used to be like that. And we're right. And we may be just a little bit ahead of you guys in what we're experiencing right now. So in the U.S., I mean, there's two words we like to throw around very liberally. We like to talk about equality. We like to talk about freedoms. And this is what we stand for. But what we really stand for in the U.S. is the freedom to compete.
Yes.
But the freedom to compete means there's winners and losers.
Yes.
Always. So yes, you're free to lose. You're free to win. And the equality gets pushed to the side. So that's just how our system is, because we've wanted it that way as a people, I guess. So talk to us about, and let's talk about what happens though. So what that means is that you have winners that win big, and they can be the millionaires, the billionaires, almost trillionaires. And then you have the rest of the people who have oftentimes lost in that free to compete environment. Now, there's a much less gap in Finland. Talk to us about your philosophy there.
Well, the overall philosophy, and this is also causing a lot of polarization these days, I have to say. But the overall, I guess, the cultural broad philosophy is that we want to keep people equal, and that means equality of opportunity, but it also means that you shouldn't earn too much compared to your neighbors. Okay. So that kind of almost like forced equality, forced in the sense that for example, the taxation system is very progressive in Finland. So when you get a pay rise, the kind of marginal tax could be even higher than 50% on that. So at some point it makes you think, like, do you want to get a raise because it goes to the government? So it's very equalizing in that sense, but it's a very different form of equality, compared to the kind of equal, opportunity of entrepreneurship. So and speaking of entrepreneurship, that's a very interesting, because I consider myself a very entrepreneurial person, but in Finland there was this recent study by a bank that what are the most okay ways of getting rich in Finland, and guess what was the number one voted by, I think, more than 40% of Finns?
What's that?
Winning in lottery.
Oh no!
And what do you think about entrepreneurship? How okay was that? Even in being a Formula One driver is more okay to get rich, or the ice hockey person going to NHL
Yes.
and a lot of money. But the entrepreneur is the lowest
Oh,
rank. So if you earn money by being an entrepreneur, you're basically a disgust to
oh
most.
no.
That just doesn't make a sense. But I don't know. That's a weird thing actually about Finns. Also, we are not that entrepreneurial. It might probably have something to do about the kind of the background of in a way having the very strong government and social welfare and this kind of I wouldn't speak about socialism in any way because we're not a socialist. In that connotation in any way. I mean, of course, there are some more socialist leaning parties and blah, but as a nation we are not. But there might be some flavors of that in the sense. But yeah.
So we like to talk about what contributes to the happiness and putting Finland at the top of the list on the happiness scale. But as you pointed out, there's always complaints. There's always grumbling. Everything is always imperfect and it isn't always satisfactory. And there's some big demographic challenges, which you hinted at earlier. Talk to us about those.
Yeah, so the demographic challenge obviously is that the baby boomers are getting old. So it's happening in many places, in many Western at least. And it's very strong in Finland too. And then the fertility rate, which they measure like how much people in fertile age produce offspring, it's getting lower. And it's actually for the original Finns, the kind of people originating from Finns. Anyway, it means that the population of Finns is declining, and it has been declining already. We are producing less Finns that we have.
And which, as you pointed out, is a challenge across most of Western.
Yeah, it is
countries.
Currently, we have a net growth in population because of immigration, but then that again causes a lot of debate, as you might imagine, and all that. And there's been also some challenges due to that in Sweden because they've been even growing by immigration much faster than us, of course, giving another economic boost. But then there's a lot of crime and problems and these kinds of things, much more than in Finland, actually. So that causes a lot of, but that's been one of the challenge. But then I remember, which has probably affected me, at the beginning of the 90s, I was like just starting to be a teenager then. And there was this very deep recession. It was at the same time as the Soviet Union broke up and Berlin Wall and all that. And they had to devalue the Finnish currency. Was called mark at that time. And a lot of bankruptcies. It swept really strongly. It was a really deep dip in the gross national product at the beginning of the 90s. And I think that has had an impact also, like that, you didn't take things for granted and it kind of tamed down things. And at least for my people in my cohort, I think that definitely had an impact.
Absolutely. The U.S. has gone through a series of those. In 2008, it was the housing crisis.
Yeah.
So many people were impacted from that. And so it makes you very timid to risk again.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And many of those, they stay in the memory of the people. And then that probably creates you a little bit of the mentality of, and we are not that much risk takers, we are kind of the, as I mentioned, the kind of introverts in a way. We want everything we want to avoid conflict, that. So we are not that outspoken people anyway.
It's very fascinating to me to have this discussion with you because the same debates are in the U.S. as you're having. We just might be in a different place than you are, maybe ahead of you in some of these things, and maybe they're exaggerated in the U.S. environment. You're seeing those debates, but maybe you see them exaggerated and magnified and amplified in what's going on right now in the U.S. But the same kind of challenges around immigration here as well. When there's a declining population, who's going to pay into the safety net for the elderly, for the young, and all that? When the workforce has diminishing numbers of contributing workers. So the answer, of course, is immigration, but that brings its own set of debates, challenges there. But
Yeah.
other than that, I mean, we really need to figure out a way. All the world needs to figure out a way in a declining working age population. How do we succeed in the future? Which brings me kind of to the last question here, which is really when you look at all the things that you would identify as Finns are doing really good at. There's a whole set of things that contribute to your happiness there. How will those attributes and characteristics help Finland in the future?
I think they will, because like I said, a lot of that has to do with the very long cultural roots of the people of Finland. And as long as we and we probably stay quite uniform even in the near future, as a people. So I think they will have a long lasting effect, because in the macro, it leads to kind of making ultimately the right kind of choices. And, one example is that there's a very heated debate right now in Finland because there's been this inheritance tax. So it means that when your mother and father die and you inherit something, you need to pay a certain amount of tax out of it. And there's a very strong, especially from the right-wing side of things, they want to take that off. And it has come over and over again to the political debate, then tamed down, then they've kept it. And again, it's very high in the debate right now. And I guess both sides have an argument that, it's why would you take off? Because then you could accumulate wealth like the Swedes do, and then you could reinvest in your business and blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, you didn't earn it. So why would you be able to keep it? Why wouldn't you give a little bit to the government to enhance the social welfare? And that whole debate continues obviously forever. There's no right answer to that. But I think this kind of and I don't believe they will ever be ever, but at least now they won't be able to take the inheritance tax off. They might soften some corners there, but anyway, it's going to be there. And that's definitely, again, one thing that kind of equalizes, if you know what I mean. So,
oh yeah, we have those same debates about dynastic wealth, where it just keeps piling up over hundreds of years. And, how much can individuals themselves eat? Or you can only sleep so much, you can only eat so much, you can only live so many places. And then that extra money, would it be better in a society to make it a better place for everyone? Same kind of debate we have here. Yeah. So I've heard the same kinds of things. It's just fascinating being able to see, coming from different cultural backgrounds, coming up with the same debates, but at the same time, finding different ways to address those at different times. Juha, I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience here, merging companies and being entrepreneurial. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It was really fun discussion. Happy to be here. And thanks everybody listening to this.